Hi, welcome to Coaching Business and today's episode about leadership in general, what a leader is, what leadership styles there are, and in specifics, shared leadership. So, how can we implement shared leadership? What does shared leadership mean? What benefits might it produce? And what are the circumstances when we should use shared leadership as a tool? First of all, the first important thing is to define the differences between what a leader is and, for example, what a manager is. Basically, a leader is somebody who influences the behavior of others with a specific goal orientation. So, if I am a leader, I want to achieve something. I have a vision, I have a goal, and in order to achieve something, the thing I have imagined as a vision, I'm influencing the behavior of others so that others help me in achieving the goal. On the other hand, a manager does not have a vision in itself. A manager realizes plans of other people and is following the rules of others. So if there is already a structure in place, and if there are already processes in place, managers do what has to be done. Um, Basically, when it comes to defining differences in one sentence, one could say that a leader is doing the right things and a manager is doing things right. After defining what a leader means and what a manager means, the second point is to define and present the leadership styles which are known, which are defined. Basically, in most cases, defined by scientists and tested by scientists empirically. So, what we are going to do is to get into a brief definition of the most known. The first one is leadership by Hersey and Blanchard. As many other leadership style concepts, they assume a dependency on context and situation and assume that leadership should be adapted to situation, to a specific situation. A specific situation, from that perspective, consists of the maturity level of the leader. The maturity of the leader, on the other hand, depends on the employee's motivation. So if I am a leader of my employees or for my employees, my maturity level of my leadership depends on their motivation and on their competence. So we have two factors in influencing maturity level of leadership, and those two factors are employees' motivation and employees' competence. Hersey and Blanchard define four leadership styles. There is a directive style, there is a coaching style, there is a participation style, and there is a delegation style. The directive style means that an employee has high motivation and low competence. So directive means there is high motivation. The employee wants to do. He's intrinsically very motivated. At the same time, the competence is very low. So maybe not the most effective, not the best employee for the specific job. The coaching style means that an employee has a low motivation and low competence. So it means that we have a situation where the motivation and the competence are very low. When we have the participation style, it is used when we have low motivation and high competence. And there is the delegation style, which means that we have high motivation and high competence. Well, question is, what do these leadership styles mean actually? So, well, we have defined that we have four leadership styles. They depend on motivation and competence of the employees. But what does it mean if my employee has high competence and low motivation, or has low motivation and low competence? Well, they have defined how a leader might act in certain situations. First of all, the directive situations, which is again high motivation, low competence. And it means that in this point, when we have low competence, we should act like with a high task orientation and a low relationship orientation. So the employee does not need to be taken care of on an emotional level. He or she is already motivated. We need to take care of the task competence, of the task orientation. This means that a leader defines roles, sets rules, makes decisions, and has always an overview over the progress, and the communication is in one direction. So if we have a employee with high motivation but low competence, what we need to do is to provide a direction for the employee to be able to work in a given environment. The name directive tells us what basically to do. The next style is the coaching style, and the coaching style means in general that we have low motivation and low competence. Low motivation and low competence leads to high task orientation and high relationship orientation. So we need to take care of both. We need to take care of the emotional level, of the motivation of the employee, as well as the task solving capabilities of the employee. What does coaching means? Which strategies can we use? Well, the leader defines roles, listens to the employee's suggestions, makes decisions. Then we have the participation style. The participation style means that we have low motivation but high competence. In this case, we don't need to have a high task orientation, but we need to have a high people's orientation, high relationship orientation. Because in participation style, we have a high competence but low motivation. So what we as leaders, what we should do is we should delegate daily business and decisions to employees. We should simplify situations and take part as a support in the decision-making process, but not as the decision maker. So the participation style means that we let our employees co-decide and let them develop higher motivation by participation in decision-making processes. Next one is the delegation style. With delegation style, we have high motivation, high competence. What we have is we, in this case, have a low motivation for tasks, and we have a low motivation or low orientation on people, on the relationships. In this case, leaders let their employees make the decision. We don't need, as leaders, to take part in decision making. Basically depends on the employee. So if the employee needs support, needs help in the decision making process, then we are there. But if they do not need help, we are just there observing from another point. At the end, making the employee believe that it is his or her decisions which are leading to new success. The next concept is the managerial grid by Blake and Mouton. The managerial grid by Blake and Mouton differentiates between leadership styles which are task-oriented and leadership styles which are relationship-oriented, which is basically comparable to the leadership styles and suggested behaviors within the leadership concept of Hersey and Blanchard. Blake and Mouton basically differentiate between 5 leadership styles within a grid, within a square. So what we have is a low on X and Y axis. We have a max and low on X and Y axis. We have a low and max on X and Y axis. We have a mid value on Y and X axis, and we have a max value. So we have 5 different styles. So the style 1.1, so 1 on the Y axis and 1 on the X axis, is the indifferent style, which means low people orientation, low task orientation. What such a leader, or let's better say such a manager, does is he or she is minimalizing efforts. He or she is only putting efforts into tasks which are necessary to fulfill, to maintain the order right now, to maintain the status quo. Then we have the leadership style 1.9, which means that we have high people orientation. The 9 stays for people orientation. The 1 of 1.9 for low task orientation. It's called the accommodation style. Within the accommodation style, the leader is seeking to build harmony among employees, which should be building performance, but as we know, it's not always. So a harmonic, a perfect environment does not always lead to engagement, to satisfaction, and to performance at the end. Then we have the other extreme, which is 9.1, with 9 being high task orientation and 1 being low relationship orientation. It's the authoritarian style. And the authoritarian style, within the authoritarian style, the leader is forcing obedience and concentrates on providing a framework for employees to fulfill their tasks properly. So the main goal is to be very, very task oriented, to fulfill the goal which is was being set by the manager or by the leader. This mean that there is no or low people's or relationship orientation, which means that the comfort and the satisfaction, the engagement of the employees is not top of the list, let's say. Then we have the behavioral style, which is average on task orientation and average on people's orientation, which means that the leadership is kind of balanced. Both objectives, so goals and let's say subjective well-being are considered, but might not be at the highest point, might not lead to the highest performance. So what we have is basically an average performing company with an average performing employee, with both being kind of in balance, but not leading to extraordinary results. And then we have the leadership style of 9.1, which is the team style with high people orientation and high task orientation. Well, basically leaders are trying to grow the teamwork, are trying to grow engagement and satisfaction, as well as intrinsic motivation among coworkers. They should help in the belief that workers are pursuing the own goals, as well as the company's goals. So basically that all employees within a team which are under a leader do seek common goal achievement. And of course they are part of the company itself. Then we are within the topic, as a next topic, we are within the topic of transformative as well as transactional leadership. Well, there are differences between both. So within the transformative leadership, we as leaders are leading with the help of a vision and inspiration. We are trying to change the future. We are trying to increase intrinsic motivation. We are trying to increase the quality of ethical culture in this decision making. We are trying to concentrate on higher goals. So we are not like pursuing only sales goals, but we are trying to pursue higher goals for our company, for our environment. Persuasion, so like let's say leadership argumentation, leadership effectiveness is based in rational argumentation. And when it comes to mechanisms, methods used, what we do is we use coaching and mentoring methods. On the other hand, we have the transactional leadership. Transactional leadership means that we have a supervising, organizational, focused on performance company. What we do is we base our actions as leaders, as managers, on rewards and punishment. What we do is we trying to maintain the presence. So we do not work with a vision. We do not try to grow the employees and increase the intrinsic motivation, but we are trying to maintain what is there right now. Then there is a fourth approach, a fourth concept, and this is the one I want to emphasize on within this video, and it's called shared leadership. Within the shared leadership approach, we have 3 different sub-approaches and sub-definitions, basically, which are scientifically evaluated within the last years, and will be within the future. Well, the first approach is the aggregation approach, which means that leadership is going over from one individual to a group of individuals. The situation itself defines the leaders. So what we do is we put the leadership role into the hands of a group, and when the situation arises, one of them or some of them will take care of leadership because the specific situation defines it as such. So the first one is the aggregation approach. The second one is the social network approach. The social network approach means that leadership is always a connection between 2 individuals within a web of connections. And each connection, so each connection of two individuals, has a leader, a 0, and a non-leader, a 1 attribute. So this means that within a web of connections, everybody will be at some point a leader, everybody will be at some point a non-leader. Within each interaction, there is always one leader and one non-leader. So this is the social network approach. And we have a distribution or centralization approach. The distribution and centralization approach means that we have a set of responsibilities and rights which are centrally available to any team member. And this distribution of these responsibilities and rights is due to the situation. So the person, the potential leader holding the most connections is the leader in a situation. So holding the most connections of responsibilities, of rights. So we have 3 different approaches. We have the aggregation approach, we have the social network approach, and we have the distribution or the centralization approach. Why is it such a special approach to take a look at shared leadership concepts? Well, in traditional sense, leadership means that we focus on an individual and on the differentiation between things and people. The managerial grid by Blankenmoeden, as well as the leadership styles by Hersey and Blanchard, both concentrate on task orientation versus relationship orientation. Within the shared leadership approach, we do not only differentiate between things and people, we do not only differentiate between task orientation and relationship orientation, but what we do is we try to take a look at the complexity of relationships and the complexity of leadership within those relationships. So what we hope to achieve is an increase in task performance by adaptive leadership per situation, let's say. Well, question is how science looks at shared leadership approaches, in this case the centralization approach, the social network approach, as well as the aggregation approach. Well, first finding, which was presented within a meta-analysis by Dino Senso, Mathieu and Kuchenberger, is that shared leadership basically increases team performance. So in a general, when it comes to a general suggestion, when it comes to a general finding of the meta-analysis, scientists have found that shared leadership approaches do impact team performance positively. They then have found that as the shared leadership approaches get more precise in their definition, so aggregation approach, social networking approach, and the third one, which is the centralization approach, the effect gets stronger, especially for the aggregation approach, especially for the social network approach. So with the aggregation approach being leadership is available, situation defines when a leader is a leader, social network approach defines leadership, shared leadership as there's always a one-to-one individual relationship, and with each relationship there is a 0 or 1 attribute, so a is leader or is not a leader. So for those two, aggregation and social network approach, there is a very strong relationship to team performance. The relationship with the centralization approach of shared leadership is not as strong as the others. And the third one, which is kind of a barrier to shared leadership approaches, is the complexity of the task. So as the complexity of the task arises, the impact of the shared leadership approach decreases, which is kind of interesting, but which might be interpreted as a task gets more complex. You need one point where knowledge and cognitive evaluation is combined. So if you have a shared leadership approach, all the necessary information to have a decision-making process functioning properly might not be available if you distribute leadership on to many different people. So basically, again, shared leadership increases team performance. Question is when to adapt shared leadership. So this is kind of the main point of this video. When should you adapt to shared leadership? When should you introduce shared leadership? Well, which circumstances, for example, when there is unbalanced leadership. So if there is a situation of unbalanced leadership, if it's not clear who the leader is, if it is not clear who has the potential to being a leader, for being a leader, shared leadership might be an interesting approach. For example, the social network approach, as it allows everybody to get into relationships with an open end, but with the end that somebody will be a leader and the other person will not. When you want to show to other employees that not being a leader is very valuable. So as soon as the goal of the company is to have leaders and experts, and leaders and experts should have the same value, this might be a good idea to provide insights into why leadership is difficult, how leadership means responsibilities. At the same time, that not being a leader is not a disgrace, and that not being a leader is has the same value for the company as being a leader. When you as a company want to build future leaders or future leadership, so shared leadership means that you are allowing your employees to participate in decision-making processes, learn how difficult it is, learn to become stronger. So this means that future leadership, if you want to build future leadership, shared leadership approach is a good idea. And if you want to build responsibility too. So if the goal is to build responsible behavior within your employees, the shared leadership approach might lead to better effects. So let's say you've decided to introduce such a new approach when it comes to leadership, because let's assume that your leader has left the company and now you want to try to figure out with whom to replace the old leader, or how to replace the old leader. Well, there are certain prerequisites that should be considered when introducing such a shared leadership approach. Basically the mindset. So what you need is a change in mindset of top management, because well, let's be clear, when it comes to the acceptance level, if the top management is not supporting the initiative, at the end the initiative will fail. The responsibilities, well, if you have a shared leadership approach, what you need is the possibility to conduct shared leadership. To conduct shared leadership, what you need is a decision-making process which allows everybody to make decisions and to take over tasks and responsibilities, not being dependent on hierarchies. The third one is coaching, and what I mean especially is external coaching for current leaders. Why? Because current leaders might think that less leadership is a downgrade. This means that coaching might help to accept the situation and to accept that shared leadership might be beneficial for him or herself as well as for the whole company. In this step, what I want to emphasize on is that I do provide coaching for executives, for example, who do find themselves in such initiatives where the first thought might be that shared leadership might mean a downgrade in, let's say, situation. And then we need, of course, external coaching for current followers. So if you have to take over responsibilities, if you have to take part in the decision-making process, what will happen is that the responsibilities which will need to be taken over by you will be higher. This means that at some point there might be a difficult situation for you. This means that external coaching might help you to adapt to new situations, to higher responsibilities. Well, and of course, the change in decision-making processes should be taken care of. So it should be transparent that there will be a shift in the process of decision-making for the company. Well, how will the effects look like of shared leadership, and what will be the effects at the end? Well, basically, performance will increase, as we have discussed, as scientists have shown. So with shared leadership approaches, team performance as well as individual performance do increase. The acceptance rate of leadership in general, as well as leadership styles in specific, as well as the difficulty of leadership grows. So as soon as you have people taking part in decision-making processes, they will see how hard it is to always consider all stakeholders and always make sure that everybody is happy. Well, it leads to increased adaptivity as for individual employees, as well as for the team, as well as for the whole company. So if we have a shared leadership approach, what this means is that the situation will define the leader, not the leader the situation, which will lead to, well, higher adaptivity. It will lead to increased innovation because people will be able to follow what they have in mind, and if their idea will be strong enough, such ideas will not be cut off because of hierarchies, but such ideas will get promoted because they will be strong. Increased motivation and engagement. So if you participate within the success of a company, as well as B within the decision-making process of a company in order to achieve success, shared leadership will increase the motivation, intrinsic motivation, as well as engagement, as it will give you the feeling that you as an employee, that your decisions impact what happens in the company. Well, and again, it helps in perceiving the participation in company success. So I hope that it was interesting. I hope that I could provide you some insights into what shared leadership means. If you are interested in the sources of what I have told you, so for example of the meta-analysis of the shared leadership approach, just take a look on my webpage, just take a look at the blog page with the leadership blog post. There are some sources. If you are interested into a discussion with me, just contact me. Please like, share, comment, contact me. Yes, and thank you for listening. Thank you for, yes, thank you.